It is not often that a journey by rail becomes the breeding ground for mystery, but then one does not often travel in the company of Hercule Poirot. I had, at the time, resigned myself to a quiet voyage between Geneva and Paris, the air of the Swiss Alps still lingering in our coats and mustaches. We had taken the midnight express, a most elegant conveyance boasting polished mahogany compartments and hushed, velvet-draped corridors. But as I would soon discover, darkness does more than obscure the landscape outside. It masks truths far more unsettling. We had just passed through Bellegarde, the rhythmic hum of the rails lulling me into a drowsy state when it happened. A steward, pale and breathless, burst into our first-class compartment. "Pardon, messieurs," he stammered in French-accented English, "but there is a most unusual occurrence." Poirot, ever alert even in repose, opened one eye. "Unusual how, mon ami?" "It is Monsieur Miles Garnett. He is gone. The conductor cannot find him anywhere on the train." Poirot sat up. "Gone?" He smoothed the crease in his silk cravat with deliberate care. "Comment? The train, it does not stop. The windows, they are too small. The corridors, no, it is impossible." And yet, impossible or not, the man had vanished. I must confess, my first thought was some drunken misadventure, an accidental tumble at a stop, perhaps. But Poirot's eyes had already narrowed with quiet intensity. He rose, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. "You say he is missing, monsieur," Poirot said to the steward, "but tell me, who last saw him?" "Madame Tissot. She was seated across from him in carriage C. She says he excused himself to visit the lavatory just before the train entered the mountain tunnel. He never returned." "A tunnel, eh?" murmured Poirot. "A useful friend to a man who wishes to disappear or who is made to do so." The steward hesitated. "We have searched every compartment. The windows are sealed. There are no open doors. It is as if he vanished into air." Poirot stepped out into the corridor, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the panelled walls. He was silent for a moment, hands folded behind his back. "Come, Hastings," he said softly. "Let us look with our own eyes, yes? The mind it may deduce, but it must first observe. And I suspect, mon cher, that the truth is already whispering behind the veil." And so it began. The train sliced through the night, hurtling toward Paris. Somewhere on board, the answer waited. But for now, only questions hovered in the air about a man who had boarded the train and never stepped off. The corridors of the midnight express were hushed, save for the rhythmic rattle of the tracks beneath us. Poirot walked with deliberate steps, nodding politely to a few curious passengers who peeked out from behind their compartment curtains. His gaze darted sharply, precisely, from brass fixtures to the velvet runners on the floor, as though each fold might hold a hidden truth. "Mon cher Hastings," he said softly, not slowing his pace. "One must never underestimate the cunning of human nature. A man does not vanish without cause. The question is, who wished Monsieur Garnett to disappear?" We entered carriage C, the site of the supposed vanishing. It was quiet, the overhead lamps casting a golden glow on the dark wood panels. At the far end of the carriage sat a middle-aged woman in mourning black. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though there were no visible tears. A wide-brimmed hat shaded most of her features, but her posture suggested a practiced elegance. "Madame Tissot," the steward whispered. "She was in the same compartment as Monsieur Garnett." Poirot gave a slight bow. "Madame, I am Hercule Poirot. Might I speak with you a moment?" Her eyes flicked up. "Of course, it's dreadful. Absolutely dreadful." Poirot sat opposite her, folding his hands primly. "You were acquainted with Monsieur Garnett?" She hesitated. "We'd spoken briefly. He was charming, if a little nervous. Said he was en route to Paris for business?" Poirot inclined his head. "You say he left the compartment just before the tunnel?" "Yes," she nodded. "He stood, checked his pocket watch and said he'd return shortly. Then, nothing. When we emerged from the tunnel and he hadn't come back, I assumed he'd perhaps stopped to speak with someone, but when the conductor came to check the tickets, and he was nowhere to be found. "Curious," murmured Poirot. "Did he leave anything behind? A bag, a newspaper?" "A briefcase," she said quickly. "Brown leather, very worn." Poirot glanced at the empty seat beside her. "And now?" "Gone," she said. "Someone must have taken it after he vanished." Poirot nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. "Merci, madame. You are most helpful." We left her there, still dabbing at her eyes. Poirot did not speak again until we stood outside the lavatory at the end of the carriage. He tested the door. It swung open easily. Inside, the compartment was immaculate. A small sink gleamed in the lamp's soft light. The window, though open a crack, had the same design as the others, too narrow for an adult to squeeze through. Poirot examined it with a frown. "Locked from the inside until recently, I think. See here, Hastings. The condensation on the sill is broken." "Could he have climbed out?" I asked, half hopeful, half skeptical. No. He would be bruised, blooded, perhaps dead. And yet there was no alarm raised, no emergency brake pulled, no blood on the tracks if he had jumped. He tapped his forehead. "Non. He did not go out this way." From the rear of the carriage, we heard muffled voices. The steward returned, accompanied by the train conductor and a man with a carefully groomed moustache and haughty demeanor, clearly one of the first-class passengers. "This is Monsieur Carlyle," the steward said. "He believes he saw Monsieur Garnett shortly before the tunnel." Carlyle nodded curtly. "He passed me in the corridor just before midnight. Seemed agitated." "In what way, monsieur?" Poirot asked. He was muttering to himself, holding that wretched briefcase of his like it contained the crown jewels. "Did he speak to anyone?" "I believe he exchanged words with the German fellow. Von Reiter, I think his name is. Tall, severe-looking chap. Occupies compartment 9, just 2 doors down." Poirot thanked him and turned to the conductor. "Monsieur, I should like a list of all first-class passengers and access to compartment 9. The conductor hesitated. "Is that necessary, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot arched an eyebrow. "A man is missing from your train, monsieur. The situation, it demands precision." Compartment 9 was dim, and its occupant was already standing at the door, a tall man in his late 40s with silvering temples and pale eyes that gave nothing away. He looked down his aquiline nose at us. "I assume you are investigating Garnett," he said without greeting. Poirot gave a nod. "Indeed, Herr von Reiter, you spoke to him before he vanished." "Yes," he said shortly. "He asked me if I knew a man named Boucher. I told him I did not." "Boucher?" Poirot repeated, glancing at me. "Yes," von Reiter said. He looked worried. Said he had made a mistake. Poirot's voice was calm, but I saw the spark in his eye. "Did he say what the mistake was?" Von Reiter shook his head. He moved on before I could ask. Honestly, he looked rather like a man about to confess something. After a few more questions, we moved on. Poirot remained silent for several steps, then murmured. "A man worried about a mistake. A briefcase that disappears with him, and now a name. Boucher." "What do you make of it?" I asked. "I make of it," he said, "that this man Garnett was not merely on a business trip, and now, Hastings, we must do what detectives always do. We must gather the suspects." The conductor furnished us with a full list of the first-class passengers. Poirot studied it silently. "There are 8 who could conceivably be connected," he said finally. "We shall speak to them one by one. Let us see which of them lies with grace and which with desperation." The next 2 interviews revealed little. An elderly English woman traveling to Paris to visit family, and a French banker who appeared more concerned with his cigars than any missing fellow passenger. But the third was more intriguing. A young woman named Clara Vale, a striking brunette with sharp eyes and a brisk manner, occupied compartment 3. She welcomed us with guarded politeness. "Yes, I saw Mr. Garnet," she said, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "He seemed tense, but I didn't speak to him. Frankly, I had no interest in small talk." "You travel alone?" Poirot asked. She hesitated. "Yes, my fiancé was to meet me in Paris. He didn't make the train." "And you did not know Mr. Garnet prior to this journey?" "No," she said too quickly. "Why would I?" Poirot tilted his head. "You are English, mademoiselle?" "Yes. And yet your accent. It is southern, no? Hampshire, perhaps?" Her expression flickered. "Surrey," she said after a beat, "if that matters." Poirot offered a small smile. "All details matter, mademoiselle." After she dismissed us, I turned to him. "You think she knows more?" "I think," he replied, "that Miss Clara Vale is not entirely what she seems. She pretends disinterest, but she watches. Did you notice the smudge of ink on her thumb?" "No," I admitted. "She has handled papers recently, and the faint imprint of spectacles in her handbag, though she wore none. Curious, non? But what does it mean?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That remains to be seen. But now, Hastings, let us visit one more person before the hour grows late. Someone who has been oddly absent from all accounts thus far, the porter assigned to carriage C." The porter was a wiry young man with a hesitant manner and eyes that darted with every question. When asked whether he had seen anything unusual, he paused a beat too long before replying. "No, sir, nothing out of the ordinary." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "a man disappears from your carriage. This is not ordinary, no?" The porter licked his lips. I just assumed he got off at a stop." "There was no stop," I said sharply. I know, but people get off somehow. Maybe climbed down, used a pass key. I didn't see it." Poirot's tone never changed, but his gaze was sharp. "Tell me, mon ami, did you ever see the contents of Monsieur Garnet's briefcase?" The porter's throat bobbed. "No," he said again, but softer. Poirot nodded, then gestured toward the rear of the train. "Merci. That will be all. For now." As we walked back, Poirot fell into thought. Finally, he said, "Someone knew what Garnet carried. Someone watched him. And I begin to believe, Hastings, that this disappearance was no act of escape, but a most deliberate removal." The train sped onward into the night, but in Poirot's mind, the pieces were slowly beginning to align. Someone on board had secrets worth killing for, and Hercule Poirot was determined to find them. Back in our compartment, Poirot sat immaculately composed, his fingertips pressed together as he stared out at the darkness beyond the window. The lights of scattered villages flickered past, ghost-like. I knew that look. His little grey cells were engaged in furious motion. I waited, resisting the urge to prompt him. When he did speak, his voice was quiet and certain. "There are too many contradictions, Hastings. The young woman who watches without seeing, the man who vanished with a briefcase, and a porter who sees less than he should. You think the porter's lying?" Poirot turned to me. "I think he saw something that frightened him, and when a man is afraid, he chooses silence, not out of guilt, but survival." There was a soft knock at the door. The steward entered again, this time bearing a telegram. "It arrived just after we left Bellegarde, monsieur, addressed to Monsieur Miles Garnet. No one claimed it, so I thought perhaps—" Poirot took the paper and unfolded it. His eyebrows lifted a fraction. "What is it?" I asked. He passed the telegram to me. It read, "Urgent. Do not hand over documents. Beauchamp arrested in Marseille. Stop. Contact delayed. Trust no one. Stop. Ta." "Beauchamp again," I muttered. So he was part of something serious. "Oui, mon ami. Garnet was clearly in possession of something valuable. Documents, it seems. and someone else aboard this train wanted them badly enough to risk removing him. You mean to say Garnett didn't vanish on his own at all? That he was, murdered? I do not rush to such conclusions, Poirot said gently. But we must now ask ourselves who would benefit from Garnett's disappearance, and who feared the arrest of this Boucher. He stood and straightened his cuffs. We must return to Mademoiselle Clara Vale. There is more to learn from her. We found her in the corridor outside her compartment, smoking a slim cigarette by the window. Her eyes flicked up as we approached, and she crushed the cigarette under her heel with practiced nonchalance. "Changed your mind about my travel history, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked coolly. Poirot offered a disarming smile. "But of course, mademoiselle. It occurred to me we spoke earlier under conditions not entirely fair to you. Permit me now to ask simply, did you know Miles Garnett before this journey?" She was quiet, a beat too long. "I may have seen him before," she said at last. "In London? Once." Poirot inclined his head. "And did this meeting concern a man named Boucher?" Her mouth twitched. "I don't know who that is. But Garnett did, and he received a warning tonight. Boucher has been arrested." She flinched. Poirot's voice softened. "You see, mademoiselle, this is not a matter of petty secrets. A man is missing, possibly dead, and the truth it will come to light. Better you are its ally than its obstacle." She bit her lip, weighing her decision. Then, with a sigh, she opened her compartment and beckoned us inside. "I met Miles Garnett through a friend," she began. "He wasn't a businessman, not really. He worked freelance, courier work, sometimes for journalists, sometimes for people who didn't want their business conducted through official channels. I was helping him. I didn't know everything. I didn't want to know, but tonight he told me he was scared. Said someone on this train might be trying to stop him from reaching Paris." "Did he show you what he was carrying?" Poirot asked. "No, only said it was in the briefcase, and he was supposed to deliver it to a contact at the Gare de Lyon. Said he'd be rich if he made it." "Rich?" I said. "And what if he didn't?" She looked down. "Then someone else would be." Poirot nodded slowly. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have done the right thing." Back in the corridor, I turned to him. "So Garnett was a courier, and these documents, whatever they were, must be important enough to kill for." "Oui. And yet no one claims to have seen the briefcase since his disappearance. Curious, no? You think it's still on the train?" "I think," Poirot said, "that it was never removed at all." We resumed our search with fresh eyes. Poirot inspected every luggage rack, every overhead compartment, every unattended bag with a quiet intensity. It was not until we reached compartment 6, unoccupied since Lausanne, that he paused. He gestured for the steward. "This compartment, it was empty when we boarded?" "Oui, monsieur. Reserved under a name, Price. But the gentleman never arrived. We've had no use for it." Poirot stepped inside. It was immaculately clean, but something about the angle of the pillows on the berth caught his eye. He moved to the lower bunk, lifted the mattress slightly, and reached underneath. With a soft rustle, he withdrew a brown leather briefcase. We stared. "It was here all along," I said. "Why hide it here?" Poirot turned the briefcase slowly, examining the worn stitching. The clasp was unlocked. Inside were papers. Dozens, maybe hundreds, typed in French, English, and German. He flipped through them carefully. Military correspondence, shipping manifests, names and codes. These are not business documents, Hastings. This is espionage. A low whistle escaped me. So Garnett was working for a foreign power. Or perhaps just for profit, but someone aboard this train knew what he had, and knew that if he reached Paris, it would mean disaster. Poirot's eyes were alight now. "We are close, mon ami, and now the final piece must fall into place." We returned to the dining car, where several of the remaining first-class passengers sat in strained conversation. Poirot moved with quiet confidence. He approached von Reiter first. "Herr von Reiter, You told me you did not know Boucher, and yet this telegram was sent to Garnett just after Boucher's arrest. I find it interesting you didn't mention being fluent in English, French, and German." The tall man's eyes darkened. "I told you, I spoke to him briefly. That is all." Poirot did not respond. Instead, he moved to Monsieur Carlyle. "You said Garnett looked agitated, that he clutched his briefcase. You failed to mention you have diplomatic clearance and access to rail manifests." Carlyle blanched. "That's irrelevant. My work has nothing to do with this." "On the contrary, monsieur. Everyone's work on this train is suddenly very relevant." He turned next to the porter, who had returned to his duties with an anxious expression. Poirot beckoned him forward. "You saw the briefcase," he said gently. "Tell me what happened to it." The porter looked from one man to another, swallowed hard, then shook his head. I was told to move it, to hide it." "By whom?" He hesitated. "I don't know his name. He gave me money. Said if I didn't do it, someone would get hurt." Poirot's expression darkened. "And so, under the mattress in an empty compartment, you concealed evidence of espionage." The young man nodded miserably. Poirot placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You did wrong, yes, but now you can do right." He turned back to the others. "Mesdames et messieurs, I believe we are dealing not with an accident, nor a disappearance of a voluntary nature, but with a deliberate silencing. Miles Garnett was targeted, and unless I am mistaken, the man who orchestrated it is still among us." I looked at him, stunned. "You mean Garnett is—" Poirot's gaze was grave. "I fear we are not searching for a vanished man, Hastings. We are searching for a body." And as the train rumbled on toward Paris, the air thick with tension, I realized what he meant. Someone had ensured Miles Garnett would never leave this train alive. There was a silence after Poirot's grim pronouncement, heavy and absolute. The passengers around us sat frozen, their expressions pale and anxious, as if the walls of the train had suddenly drawn closer. Outside, the French countryside hurtled past, indifferent and dark beneath a slivered moon. Inside, however, the air was electric with fear. Poirot stood still for a moment longer, observing their reactions with a calm that belied the storm beneath his measured gaze. I had seen it before. This was the moment when his mind gathered the threads, human behavior, motive, contradiction, and began to weave its pattern. It was Monsieur Carlyle who broke the silence. "Surely, Monsieur Poirot, you aren't suggesting there's been a murder aboard this train? I mean, how... where?" Poirot raised a hand, gently but firmly. "Monsieur Carlyle, when a man vanishes without a trace from a sealed carriage, one must consider the possibility that he has not, in fact, left the carriage at all." Von Reiter shifted in his seat. "Are you saying his body is still aboard, that someone disposed of it en route?" "Just so. The train made brief stops. A man working alone would struggle to remove a body unnoticed. But two, perhaps. Ah, that is another matter. Or perhaps the body never left at all." Clara Vale spoke next, her voice taut. "But if he's dead, then surely someone must have seen it happen. You can't kill a man in a crowded train without drawing attention." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "But of course you can, Mademoiselle Vale. You must only choose the correct moment. In confusion, in haste, perhaps when others are conveniently distracted by dinner, or sleep, or a shift in the train's motion. Timing, mademoiselle. It is everything." I felt a chill as I thought of the moment we were jostled by a sudden curve in the tracks, some 30 minutes before we were told Garnett was missing. I had paid it no mind. But Poirot, he noticed everything. He turned suddenly to the steward. "You mentioned earlier that you took attendance just after we left Bellegarde, yes?" The man nodded, clearly uncomfortable under scrutiny. "Oui, monsieur. Routine check. I marked down those in their compartments or accounted for in the salon cars. Then I must ask to see the list. Now." The steward hesitated but relented and returned minutes later with a small leather folder. Poirot opened it, flipping swiftly through the pages. He paused. Ah, he murmured. There is an inconsistency. He turned the book so I might read it. The entry for compartment 9, Garnett's berth, had been marked as vacant at the time of the check. But that's impossible, I said. Garnett boarded with us. We saw him enter his compartment before dinner. Just so. But if he was not present during the check, then either the steward made an error, or Garnett was already gone. Gone? I said. You mean already dead? Poirot looked toward the steward. Were you the one to make this notation? The steward fidgeted. Non, monsieur. It was my colleague, Léon. Bring him, s'il vous plaît, Poirot said, his voice clipped. As we waited, Poirot turned back to the others. Let us speak frankly. If Garnett was murdered on this train, there are a limited number of opportunities and even fewer places to conceal the body. But if someone were clever, very clever, they might use the very structure of the train itself to their advantage. Such as, I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The luggage compartments, the food service lockers, perhaps even the conductor's storage between carriages. We shall inspect them all. Léon appeared, red-faced and visibly nervous. Poirot gave him the same question. Was compartment 9 truly empty when he performed the check? Léon swallowed hard. It was dark, monsieur. The door was ajar, and I assumed... Well, he must have been in the dining car. Poirot's gaze narrowed. You assumed, but you did not look. No, monsieur. Poirot gave a small sigh. Assumption is the enemy of truth, mon ami. Thank you. Léon was dismissed, and Poirot turned immediately on his heel and made for the narrow passageway between carriages. I followed, ducking as we passed into the join between the sleeping and dining compartments. Poirot stopped beside a narrow locked cupboard and gestured. Here, this is where they store cleaning equipment and linens. Not ideal, but possible. He examined the lock, then took a small key from his pocket. Courtesy of the steward, who, under pressure, remembered that he had seen another key hanging behind the staff alcove. He unlocked the door and opened it. I braced myself for the worst. Inside were shelves stacked with towels, brushes, and other domestic items. But no body. Poirot, undeterred, pulled each shelf aside, peering behind, below, even lifting the linen bundles one by one. Still, nothing. Perhaps the baggage compartment, I offered. No, it is locked, and the guards accounted for all passengers unloading at each station. He was about to close the door when his eye caught something. A faint smear on the interior of the cupboard door. Red, almost dried. He reached into his pocket and produced a white handkerchief, dabbing it. I leaned closer. Blood? Poirot did not answer. He stepped back and gestured downwards. Look, do you see? I peered again. There, behind a folded blanket at the base of the cupboard, a small bundle of fabric had been wedged. Poirot bent and retrieved it carefully. It was a silk handkerchief, navy blue, monogrammed in silver thread with the initials M.G. Garnett's, I said quietly, and stained with blood. Not much, but enough. He was here. Then where is he now? Poirot didn't answer. Instead, he moved swiftly, retracing our steps through the carriages. When we reached the end of the sleeping car, he opened the heavy door to the outer vestibule. The cold air rushed in. He examined the metal grating at the edge. Locked, he murmured. Of course. He peered over the rail. Below, nothing but rushing darkness. To throw a man from a moving train is difficult, Hastings, especially unnoticed, but perhaps our murderer is not alone. He turned, eyes blazing with the glint of near certainty. There is someone helping them. We returned inside. The train shuddered as it began slowing for its final stop before Paris. Now, he said, we must speak with Mademoiselle Vale again, and then, I believe it will be time for everyone to gather. There is something I wish to test. Test? Oui. A hypothesis. We have enough of the pattern to begin seeing the whole. But not the murderer? Oh, I believe I know who it is, Poirot said, adjusting his cuffs. Now I simply require confirmation, and of course, their reaction. Back in the saloon car, Poirot approached Clara Vale alone. She was seated now, arms folded, an untouched glass of wine before her. You knew what he carried, Poirot said softly. More than you admitted. She met his gaze evenly. I told you, I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know. But you did know, Poirot said, because you warned him. I suspect the telegram, urgent, vague, was not from some mysterious T, but from you. She blinked. You think I sent the telegram? I do. You feared for him, or perhaps for yourself. But either way, you knew something had gone wrong. She didn't reply. Poirot's voice lowered. You loved him, didn't you? Her mouth opened, then closed again. She turned away. I did, she whispered. But I didn't know who to trust. Neither did he. Then trust me now, mademoiselle. Help me find the truth. She looked at him for a long moment, then gave the smallest of nods. Poirot straightened. Then it is time. And as the train rolled toward Paris and the light of the Gare de Lyon loomed faintly on the horizon, Poirot summoned the passengers one final time. The truth, at last, was ready to be revealed. The saloon car, now dimly lit with the hushed elegance of the late hour, held a fragile silence. The train had reduced its speed, a sign that Paris loomed just ahead. Yet none of the passengers moved to collect their belongings. They had been summoned by Poirot, and when Hercule Poirot summoned, people obeyed. There was a gravity to him now, the sense of something decisive nearing its resolution. He stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette erect and composed. I recognized the stance. It was not theatrical, but purposeful. He was ready to lay the trap, or spring it. Mesdames, messieurs, he began, his voice calm, almost conversational. It is not for my amusement that I have asked you here. There has been a crime aboard this train. A man, Michael Garnett, is missing. I do not say dead, not yet, but all evidence suggests he has not merely disembarked. Something more sinister has occurred. He paced slowly, eyes drifting to each of them in turn. We know he boarded. He entered his compartment, and shortly thereafter, he vanished. We also know that someone attempted to mislead us by marking his compartment as unoccupied. That mistake, ladies and gentlemen, was not an accident. It was an effort to obscure the timeline, Colonel von Reiter interjected brusquely. Are you accusing the staff? Poirot inclined his head. Not directly, but someone influenced them. A man absent during a routine check might be overlooked, provided someone encouraged the oversight. Encouraged, said Mrs. Tremblay, clutching her pearl necklace. How? A tip, a distraction, a small bribe. It needn't be elaborate. But let us move forward. He turned toward Clara Vale, who met his gaze with remarkable calm. Mademoiselle Vale has admitted to me, in private, that she sent a message, an anonymous telegram, to Garnett before the journey began. A warning. Clara's expression did not waver. She gave a single nod. I did. This caused a murmur among the others. Why? Asked Carlyle. What were you afraid of? I didn't know, she said, voice low. But I suspected. Michael was anxious, more than usual. He told me nothing, but I knew something was wrong. He never would have agreed to meet me in Paris otherwise. He hated secrets. Poirot stepped closer. But secrets, mademoiselle, were all around him. For instance, his diplomatic pouch. This drew everyone's attention. Poirot allowed the pause to build. Yes, Monsieur Garnett was not merely a courier. He was entrusted with a very specific and highly sensitive item. One that, in the wrong hands, could compromise national interests. Then this is espionage? Asked Carlyle. We're dealing with spies. Poirot's brows arched ever so slightly. Espionage, monsieur? Perhaps, but not the kind one might expect. He gestured to me. Hastings, would you please retrieve the object from my valise? I did so, puzzled. He had shown me nothing before. I returned with a small envelope, which Poirot accepted with a nod. From it, he withdrew the blood-stained handkerchief we had found, initials embroidered in silver. This was found in the cleaning cupboard near the sleeping cars. It belonged to Garnett. It is stained, perhaps with blood. Certainly it had been concealed. The silence was suffocating. Poirot continued, Now ask yourself, who would conceal a handkerchief belonging to a man presumed to be missing? Who would want to fabricate the impression that Garnett never boarded the train at all? Someone who planned his disappearance, I said aloud, without quite meaning to. Exactement, Poirot replied with a brief smile. He took a step back, surveying his audience. So who amongst you would benefit most from Garnett's disappearance? It is not merely a question of motive, but of opportunity, of behavior. He turned to Carlyle. You, monsieur, were eager to speak to Garnett at dinner, and yet when he failed to appear, you said nothing. I assumed he was unwell, Carlyle said stiffly. And yet you were visibly unsettled throughout the evening, Poirot said. You glanced toward the corridor no fewer than 8 times. I counted. Carlyle flinched. Poirot turned to von Reiter. Colonel, you are German, yes? But formerly of the Austrian diplomatic service, a man of many travels. You told me you met Garnett once in Vienna, but Garnett's records show no travel to Austria in the last 3 years. Von Reiter's jaw tightened. I may have misremembered. Indeed, Poirot said dryly. You also have a background in field operations, surveillance, intimidation. You even knew where the cleaning closets were located. That is hardly incriminating. Poirot allowed the point, but did not linger. He moved next to Mrs. Tremblay. And you, madame, have a son in need of an expensive operation. You mentioned it in passing last night at dinner. I imagine a sum of money would be persuasive. Mrs. Tremblay turned pale. What are you suggesting? That I would kill a man for money? No, madame. But you might be persuaded to open a door, look the other way. Perhaps even to deliver a note to the steward to delay the check of a compartment. She clutched her pearls tighter. Finally, Poirot turned to Clara, again. And you, mademoiselle, you are the emotional key. You are the reason Garnett took a risk. He trusted you, and you trusted someone else, someone who used that trust to gain access to him. Clara whispered, Who? Poirot walked toward the rear of the car, where a tall man in a porter's uniform had just stepped in, one of the senior train staff. You, Monsieur Leblanc? Poirot said calmly. You were not scheduled to be on this train. Your presence was a last-minute addition. Your name was not on the original manifest. The porter looked confused. I was called in to replace a sick colleague. Indeed, Poirot said. Only your real name is not Leblanc. Your real name is Marc Delacour, formerly of French military intelligence, dishonorably discharged for the unauthorized sale of classified documents. Gasps rippled through the passengers. Poirot's voice hardened. You followed Garnett onto this train. You used your position to monitor him. You waited for the opportune moment, and with the assistance of someone, perhaps more than one, you attacked him. You stored his body, perhaps temporarily, before planning to remove it at Gare de Lyon. But you miscalculated. Delacour's face had turned a shade paler, but he did not run. He stood still, lips pressed tightly together. I confronted the trainmaster just before summoning you all, Poirot continued. I asked for the full staff register and compared it with the railway's personnel files. You're not on them, and in that moment, monsieur, your deception ended. Delacour gave a slight, bitter smile. You're clever. I'll grant you that. Poirot nodded. Merci. But tell me, where is Garnett now? There was another pause. Delacour opened his mouth, and then the doors at the far end of the carriage burst open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by the trainmaster and another man, taller, familiar. Clara stood, eyes wide. Michael? And indeed, it was Garnet, bruised, pale, but very much alive. There was a stunned silence as he stepped forward. "I was locked in a supply trunk," he said hoarsely. "In the baggage car. He drugged me. I only woke an hour ago." Poirot's gaze swept the room. "Voilà, the final piece." He turned back to Delacour. "You meant to deliver him, dead or unconscious, into the hands of your associates in Paris. But thanks to a few inconvenient details, a handkerchief, a lie, a woman's courage, you failed." The gendarmerie closed in on Delacour. He offered no resistance. Garnet took Clara's hand, and for the first time since boarding, the tension lifted. Outside, the train slowed further as the lights of the Gare de Lyon glittered into view. I turned to Poirot, still stunned. So it was about espionage, after all. Poirot gave a slight shake of the head. "No, Hastings. It was about betrayal, greed and fear, as most crimes are." And as the train hissed to its final stop, Hercule Poirot reached for his hat, placed it gently on his head, and with all the precision and dignity of his calling, stepped off the train. The station at Gare de Lyon had taken on a surreal stillness in the wake of the drama. Uniformed officers escorted Marc Delacour through the cavernous concourse, their boots tapping in unison on the tiled floor. Poirot watched the procession silently, the faintest trace of satisfaction curving his lips. But I, still reeling from the sudden reappearance of Michael Garnet, could hardly compose myself. "I say, Poirot," I muttered as we stepped into the private waiting room to which the railway officials had kindly admitted us. "You might have warned me the man was alive." Poirot gave a delicate shrug and flicked an invisible speck of dust from his cuff. "Mon ami, had I done so, your reaction would not have served its purpose. A natural shock, even from you, can disarm the most hardened suspect." I blinked. "So you used me?" He inclined his head, with affection and finesse, as always. Michael Garnet sat in an armchair nearby, a wool blanket wrapped around his shoulders, and Clara Vale beside him, gently holding his hand. Despite the bruising around his temple and the pallor of his skin, he was lucid. "I can't thank you enough," he said hoarsely, looking at Poirot. "If you hadn't uncovered Delacour's identity, you would have vanished into the annals of unsolved mysteries," Poirot finished. "No, monsieur, that I could not permit." "But how did you know," Clara asked, "that he was alive?" "I did not know," Poirot corrected gently. "I suspected. You see, it was all too clean. No blood, no sign of struggle in the compartment, no signs of hasty departure, but more than that, there was purpose to the silence. Garnet's disappearance was engineered to look like it never happened. That level of precision is not for murder. It is for delay." Garnet nodded slowly. "He wanted to hand me over. Alive." "Exactly," Poirot said. "Your captor wanted to ensure you remained useful. That is why he drugged you, rather than disposed of you. That is why the handkerchief was not destroyed, only hidden. The intention was to obscure the timeline until the train arrived in Paris, where you could be removed quietly." There was a knock at the door, and a stern-looking officer entered. "Monsieur Poirot," he said in French-accented English, "the prisoner is being processed. We have also detained a second man at the station, a railway employee identified as working with Delacour. He had a forged manifest and was loitering near the baggage car." Poirot nodded. "Bon, that confirms it. Delacour did not work alone." After the officer left, Poirot turned his eyes once more to Garnet. "Now, monsieur, if you are well enough, I must ask, what were you transporting?" Garnet hesitated, and for a moment I thought he would refuse. Then, perhaps reassured by Clara's presence and the gravity in Poirot's eyes, he spoke. "It was a document," he said. "Not original, but a copy of something sensitive, something that exposed a string of covert transactions involving several neutral governments. If it had leaked, it could have destabilized diplomatic relations across Europe. Poirot's face remained impassive. And it was entrusted to you? I was merely the courier. I was instructed to take the copy to the British legation in Paris, where it would be locked away. And you told no one of your mission? Garnett looked away. Only Clara, just before the train departed. I didn't name the document, but I told her enough to know she should be careful. Poirot's expression shifted subtly. Indeed. That explains why Delacour targeted her so carefully in the lounge car. He knew she was your weakness, that she might know something. Clara blinked. He spoke to me about poetry. I thought he was harmless. C'est toujours comme ça, Poirot murmured. The harmless man is often the most dangerous. Garnett exhaled slowly. What happens now? Poirot folded his hands. You deliver your document, as intended, but you must also prepare to testify. This matter may have larger consequences than you realize. A short while later, after the proper arrangements had been made, Poirot and I walked along the platform to the exit. The lamps overhead cast long shadows across the smooth stone, and the chill of early morning air lingered. I shoved my hands in my pockets, still trying to make sense of the layers we had uncovered. Do you believe it's over, Poirot? I asked. No more accomplices waiting in the shadows? Poirot did not answer at once. He stepped lightly over a gap in the platform, then paused. No, Hastings. It is not entirely over. There is still one piece that does not fit. I halted. What do you mean? He turned toward me, face contemplative. The note. The anonymous message Miss Vale sent Garnett. It arrived at the embassy an hour before departure, but someone intercepted it and ensured it was handed to him personally aboard the train. Who? Well, the railway staff. But Delacour was already posing a staff. He had no need to intercept a message that was not yet dangerous. Yet he did. Why? I frowned. Are you suggesting someone else tipped him off? Just so, Poirot said softly. Someone who knew what Clara intended. Someone who had access to her communication. I believe, Hastings, we have uncovered the brute, but not the brain. We were silent a moment, then Poirot added, and one more thing. The attempted murder was precise, professional, but the execution, hasty. Delacour did not have enough time or information. Someone manipulated him into acting before he was ready. I felt a chill. Then you think someone else remains at large? Poirot gave a small, grim smile. I do not think, mon ami. I know. Just then, a voice called from behind. Poirot! Monsieur Poirot! We turned to see the familiar form of Inspector Moreau, the senior French police officer, hurrying toward us with a folded telegram in his hand. What is it? Poirot asked. Moreau handed it over. Intercepted communication, sent from a Paris hotel. It was addressed to a woman, Clara Vale. Poirot unfolded it, scanned it, and his eyes narrowed. Then he passed it to me. It read, My darling, I trust he took the bait. I'll explain everything once we are free of this. Wait for me at the opera, as planned. I looked up in astonishment. But, darling, Clara, she was being used? Poirot's face was unreadable. No, Hastings. It is worse than that. She was not being used. She was using. The weight of those words settled between us like an iron door swinging shut. He glanced toward the city streets just beyond the station gates. Come, Hastings. We are not done. And without another word, he strode into the shadows of Paris, his coat flaring like a curtain on the final act. Yet I knew, somehow, the real performance had only just begun. We walked in purposeful silence through the damp streets of Paris, the early morning mist rising like a veil across the cobblestones. The telegram in my pocket burned like a brand. Its words still clanged in my thoughts with a bitter resonance. My darling, the bait, the opera. It was unthinkable. Clara Vale, gentle, kind, with eyes full of worry for Garnett, had played us all for fools. Or so it appeared. Poirot's gait remained composed, but I could see the tension in his jaw and the steely gleam in his eyes. The sharp lines of his silhouette, cast by the gas lights overhead, reminded me of a sword drawn, but not yet struck. His mind was still at work, ticking through details as if measuring the crime with a jeweler's loop. "She cared for him," I said finally, unsure whether I spoke to him or to myself. I saw it in her face when Garnett was brought in. That wasn't acting. Poirot glanced sideways at me, then adjusted the fold of his gloves. L'affection, Hastings, can be genuine and yet still mask betrayal. The human heart is capable of contradiction. Remember always, a criminal is not devoid of feeling. Sometimes it is precisely their emotion that betrays them. We reached the avenue leading to the Palais Garnier just as the first signs of daylight began to touch the rooftops. Paris looked sleepy, gilded and unaware of the coils of intrigue unfurling beneath her grandeur. Poirot did not slow as we approached the opera house. He motioned to a side entrance reserved for staff and performers. "She will not appear in the main foyer, non," he murmured. "If she intends to wait for her correspondent, she will choose a place familiar and discreet. Come." The interior was dim and cavernous, the scent of dust and velvet clinging to the air. We descended a set of servant stairs that twisted beneath the stage and led into a corridor lined with rehearsal rooms. From one of them came the faint sound of a piano, the notes light and tentative. Poirot paused, listening. Then he opened the door without knocking. Clara Vale sat at the piano, her back to us, fingers poised over the keys. She wore a dark coat, and her bag rested on the bench beside her. She did not turn. "You came," she said softly. "Oui, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, "but I fear I'm not the one you hoped for." She exhaled, letting her hands fall into her lap. Slowly she turned. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was no fear in them, only resignation. "I suppose the telegram gave me away." Poirot inclined his head. It was carelessly worded for a woman of such discernment. She looked down. "It wasn't meant for anyone else to read." I stepped forward. "Then it's true? You led Garnett into a trap?" Clara flinched as if I had struck her. "No, I didn't know it was a trap. Not at first." Poirot moved around the piano, placing himself between her and the door. "Explain, if you please. The full truth, mademoiselle. No flourishes." She swallowed hard and clasped her hands together. "I met René in Berlin. He was charming, mysterious, a journalist, or so he said. We spent a few weeks together. Then one night he disappeared. Months later he contacted me again. He said he needed a favor, a harmless one. He knew I was seeing Michael, and he asked if I would convince him to take a particular train, at a particular time." Her voice cracked. "He said it was to ensure a confidential meeting, that Michael's document would reach the right people. I didn't question it. I loved them both in different ways, and I thought—" "You thought you could play both sides," Poirot finished coldly. "No," she protested. "I only realized what was truly happening when Michael vanished. When that man came and spoke to me in the lounge car, Delacour, I knew something was wrong. That's why I sent the anonymous message. I wanted to undo it, to warn Michael without René knowing." Poirot was silent for a moment, then turned and walked to the small dressing mirror on the wall. He looked at her reflection as he spoke. "You have done much harm in your naivety, mademoiselle, but I believe you are telling the truth now. Your eyes, they are too honest to lie with success." I nearly laughed in disbelief. "You believe her, Poirot?" "I believe she is not the mastermind," he said calmly. "But she is the bait, the connection, and now we must use her as René intended, to bring him out of hiding." Clara stared at him. "You want me to lure him here?" "Just so," Poirot said. "He will not come if he suspects danger. But he thinks you are still loyal, that you will wait for him as promised." She nodded slowly, her face pale. And what will happen when he arrives? Poirot's expression softened. That depends, mademoiselle, on his nature. It was just past noon when we returned to the opera house, having put our trap into motion. The police, coordinated by Inspector Moreau, were discreetly stationed throughout the building. Clara sat once more in the rehearsal room, the door slightly ajar. She wore the same coat, the same anxious expression. We waited in the shadows outside, a few feet from the entrance, hearts pounding in silence. At precisely 1 o'clock, a man appeared at the end of the corridor. He was tall, with a confident stride and an elegant air. His overcoat was impeccably tailored, and he carried a bouquet of white roses. Poirot whispered, "Voilà, Monsieur René Delmar." René approached the door and knocked lightly before stepping inside. "My darling," he said, voice smooth as silk. "You waited for me." Clara rose from the bench. "Of course. I had to see you." He handed her the flowers and kissed her cheek. "Then everything is fine. We'll be gone from Paris by evening. You've done well." She hesitated. "René, tell me, was it truly necessary? Michael?" He stiffened. "He was a threat. You understand that, don't you?" Poirot stepped into the room then, quietly but with an authority that arrested all movement. "A threat, monsieur, or merely an obstacle to your ambitions?" Delmar turned, his expression darkening. "Who are you?" "Hercule Poirot," he said, bowing slightly. "And you, monsieur, are under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and espionage." Delmar made a move toward Clara, but she stepped away. "I'm sorry, René, I had to." "You foolish girl," he hissed. "You think this saves you?" Poirot raised a hand. "That is quite enough. There are witnesses, recordings, and your message, all quite sufficient." The officers closed in, taking Delmar into custody. He did not struggle, but his eyes burned with contempt as he passed us. "I'll be remembered," he muttered. "Not you." Poirot only smiled. "That is the hope of every mediocre man, monsieur." After the arrest, we stood once more in the fading light of afternoon outside the Palais Garnier. Clara sat on a bench nearby, alone with her thoughts. "You were right," I said to Poirot. "There was a brain behind the brute." He gave a small nod. "Yes, and now that both are gone, peace may return, though not without scars." We watched as Clara stood and walked away, the bouquet of white roses forgotten on the bench. Poirot sighed. "Such are the tragedies of the heart, mon ami. The mind may calculate, deduce, even anticipate betrayal, but the heart is an anarchist." "Will she be charged?" I asked. Poirot shook his head. "She was manipulated, not malicious. Let that be her punishment." I looked once more at the fading opera house, its facade bathed in gold. A place of performance, masks, illusion, where every player hides behind their part. Only Poirot, ever honest in his observations, had seen through them all. The mood on the train back to London was curiously muted. Outside, the French countryside unfurled in dusky greens and silver greys, rain beginning to trace delicate patterns down the window panes. Hastings sat opposite Poirot in their private compartment, his arms folded, eyes fixed on the fields blurring past. Poirot, as always, was immaculate, his tie straight, his mustaches untroubled by the wind or the world. Yet there was a slight furrow to his brow, a certain pensiveness to his gaze. For a man who had just brought down a master manipulator and rescued a valuable intelligence asset, he looked unsatisfied. "Still something bothering you?" Hastings asked at last. Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a small notebook from his coat pocket and began flipping through it, reviewing the tidy notes he had made since the beginning of the case. The symbols, timings, and character sketches danced beneath his fingertips like chess pieces, awaiting one final repositioning. "I'm always troubled, Hastings," he said finally, "when a matter concludes too neatly. It leaves a taste in the mouth, comme une sauce trop sucrée. One expects a trace of bitterness, of imperfection, and yet— We caught Delmare red-handed, Hastings reminded him. He admitted to the plot. Clara confirmed her part. The documents were recovered. What more could there be? Poirot smiled faintly, not without affection. Ah, mon ami, what is it that I always say? The truth, it is like the yolk of an egg, surrounded by the white. Evidence, motive, confession, but the center must still be intact. And here, I am not certain we have reached it. He tapped a page in his notebook. Tell me, why did Delmare choose Clara Vale, of all women, to be his liaison? She was close to Garnett. He probably knew she'd have influence. Poirot nodded. Yes, that part is clear. But Delmare is not a man who acts without layers. He does not choose merely for utility. He chooses for leverage. You think he was blackmailing her? No, not in the traditional sense. But he had something. Or someone, a pressure point she never admitted to. Hastings frowned. But why wouldn't she tell us? Poirot looked up. Guilt, perhaps. Or shame. Or fear. There are wounds that do not bleed, Hastings. Their conversation was interrupted by a light knock on the door. A young steward entered, bowed, and handed Poirot an envelope. This was left for you at the ticket desk, monsieur. A gentleman delivered it not an hour ago. Poirot accepted it with a curious glance. The envelope was unmarked except for his name, handwritten in a precise, angular script. He opened it and read silently, the words sharpening the line of his mouth. Hastings leaned forward. Well? Poirot handed it over. The letter was brief. Monsieur Poirot, you have removed one mask. I congratulate you, but you have not yet glimpsed the face beneath. The play is not over. Cordially, Hastings let out a low whistle. So Delmare wasn't working alone. Poirot's gaze narrowed. No, and more than that. He was the visible actor, not the playwright. A long silence passed, filled only by the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels. You suspect someone else? Hastings asked finally. Poirot closed his notebook and tucked it away. I do not suspect, I know, but I do not yet understand their motive. That evening, back in London, Poirot returned to his flat on Whitehaven Mansions with renewed focus. He arranged the remaining clues before him on his Art Deco desk. The telegram, Clara's statements, the intercepted message between Delmare and his contact, and the mysterious card bearing only the single letter X. Poirot reviewed each, cross-referencing dates, locations, known associations. But it was not the documents that drew his eye. It was a photograph taken on the night of the train journey before the disappearance. Hastings had captured it unwittingly in the lounge car. A candid moment, with Garnett in the background, Clara beside him, and another figure just beyond, blurred but familiar. Poirot leaned forward, peering closely at the silhouette. Aha, he whispered. The stagehand appears once more. He called for Hastings, who entered from the kitchen with a biscuit in hand. Poirot held up the photo. Do you see, mon ami? Look. Beyond Garnett. That woman. The scarf. The posture. Hastings blinked. That's— good heavens. Isn't that the same woman who dropped her glove outside the train station? Exactement. She appeared twice, and too conveniently. Once when Garnett disappeared. Once when we arrived in Paris, and she vanished just as quickly. You think she's involved? I do more than think. I'm now certain that she is the orchestrator. Poirot turned back to his desk and pulled out a dossier marked with a red tab. He leafed through the pages until he found what he sought. A surveillance photo taken by British intelligence months prior during an arms summit in Geneva. The same woman, blonde, elegant, a thin scar just visible near her temple. She is known only as Elena Marek, Poirot said. a Czech national believed to be working under multiple aliases. Highly placed, ruthless, and always just out of reach. But why would she involve herself in this business with Garnett and Delmar? Poirot tapped the photo with a satisfied finger. Because Garnett was not carrying ordinary intelligence. The papers he was transporting contained names, deep-cover agents embedded across Europe. If those names were leaked, Hastings went pale. It would be a massacre. Indeed, Poirot said quietly. And now we see it clearly. Delmar was the diversion, Marek the mastermind. She arranged for Garnett to vanish, for Clara to feel cornered, for Delmar to be sacrificed, all so that she could escape with the real prize. But we have the briefcase. The documents were inside. Poirot shook his head. We have a briefcase and documents, but I have examined them. They are expertly forged, so close as to fool most, even intelligence. But not Poirot. There was a beat of silence before Hastings breathed. Then the real documents. Poirot folded his hands. Are still missing, and so is Elena Marek. That night, Poirot placed a single call to Inspector Japp, brief, precise, and urgent. By dawn, they were on a flight to Geneva. Another train, another theater, and the curtain, Poirot knew, was only beginning to rise. The small plane banked gently over Lake Geneva as it began its descent. From their window seats, Hastings admired the serene shimmer of water and the snow-laced tips of the Alps beyond. Yet for all the postcard beauty of the scene, the tension seated beside him was unmistakable. Poirot sat unusually still, his eyes shut, fingertips pressed together as if holding some delicate thought in place. Any particular destination once we land? Hastings asked, his tone casual, though he suspected Poirot had already charted their next 10 steps. Indeed, mon ami, we shall pay a visit to the Rue de l'Horloge, number 7, Poirot murmured without opening his eyes. A discreet pension, popular among transient dignitaries, spies, and those who wish not to be seen. I believe Miss Elena Marek has checked in under the name Lena Moravec. A small variation, subtle, but telling. How in the world did you come by that? Poirot opened one eye and smiled faintly. Observation, inference, and a brief word with an intelligence officer who owes me a favor. It is surprising what debts are remembered when one inquires politely and persistently. Upon landing, they moved swiftly through the airport, where a car arranged by Inspector Japp waited for them. The driver, a tight-lipped young Swiss man, nodded wordlessly and pulled away into the cold, clean streets of Geneva. It was early morning, and the city had yet to stir fully awake. Fog curled at the corners of the avenues. Poirot's gaze remained fixed ahead, scanning not just the buildings but the silences between them. The pension was modest, tucked between a tobacconist and a boutique selling antique clocks. A wrought-iron gate led to a small courtyard garden, trimmed with geometric precision, a detail that seemed to please Poirot greatly. As they entered, a receptionist with a pinched face and ink-stained fingers greeted them with disinterest. Poirot gave a courteous bow. "Mademoiselle, I believe a Miss Moravec arrived 3 days ago. I am her uncle, come on family business of utmost urgency." The receptionist looked them over skeptically. "She does not accept visitors." Poirot tilted his head. Perhaps not, but would she accept a letter? He retrieved a sealed envelope from his inner coat pocket and laid it gently on the desk. Curiosity flickered in the woman's eyes. "I suppose I can deliver it." "Merci," Poirot said, stepping back. They waited near a marble staircase for what seemed an eternity. Then footsteps echoed lightly above, and a woman appeared on the landing. She was tall, elegant, her posture regal even in casual clothing. A scarf was wound artfully around her throat, the same scarf Poirot had noted in the train station photograph. Her eyes, a pale grey-green, swept across the lobby and settled on Poirot. He bowed slightly. "Mademoiselle Marek, shall we speak plainly?" She descended the stairs with fluid grace, pausing a few feet away. Her expression was unreadable. "You are more persistent than I expected, Monsieur Poirot." "And you," he replied gently, "are more careful than most, but not quite careful enough." She gave a faint smile. "That sounds like the beginning of a threat." "No, mademoiselle, it is merely an observation." Marek nodded once. "Then observe that I have nothing to say. You uncovered your mole. You recovered your documents." "Forgive me, but no," Poirot said, folding his arms. "We recovered copies of the documents. The real ones were removed during the distraction you engineered." She didn't deny it. Her eyes flicked toward Hastings, then back to Poirot. "And you've come to retrieve them?" Poirot took a measured step closer. "I've come to understand your purpose, and perhaps to offer an alternative." This gave her pause. "You do not strike me as the bargaining type," she said slowly. "I am not," he agreed. "But I am the type who sees beneath surfaces. The British believe you stole those names for foreign powers, perhaps even for sale. But I do not think that is your goal. Enlighten me. I believe you have a list of agents who have been compromised, not by accident, but through betrayal, from within. You stole the list not to sell, but to safeguard, because you do not know whom to trust." For a heartbeat, she showed something like surprise. Then it was gone. Poirot pressed gently. "Your silence, your manipulation of Delmar, your escape from the train, these are the actions of someone desperate not to let the information fall into the wrong hands. Not because you are a traitor, but because you believe the traitor is already embedded within British intelligence." She looked away. "I've seen fear, mademoiselle," Poirot continued quietly. "And I have seen honor. Sometimes they wear the same face." At last, she turned back. "You're not entirely wrong," she said, her voice low. "But if you were in my position, would you have done any differently? That, mademoiselle, is not the question. The question is, what will you do next?" Marek hesitated. Then she reached into her coat and withdrew a thin envelope. She handed it to Poirot without a word. "The real list," she said, simply. "Names and code names, all active, some already dead, I suspect." Poirot took the envelope with care, tucking it into his inner pocket. "You understand, I must hand this over." "I assumed as much." "But I can vouch for your motive," he said softly, "and perhaps for your freedom." She gave a dry laugh. "I doubt that matters." Poirot's voice was calm. "To those in power, perhaps not. But to one's conscience, it matters a great deal." A distant church bell tolled. Poirot turned to Hastings. "We must go. Jap is expecting us at the embassy." Marek didn't follow them to the door. She remained in the lobby, silhouetted against the stained glass light, her expression unreadable. In the car, Hastings exhaled. "Do you really believe she acted out of conscience?" Poirot watched the streets roll by. "I believe in the complexity of human nature. We may begin in selfishness and end in sacrifice, or begin in principle and lose ourselves along the way. But Marek, she did what she believed was right. That, at least, I must respect." They delivered the list to Jap at the embassy, where British security officials were already in a frenzy. Names were checked, agents warned, evacuations quietly initiated. The crisis had been averted. Barely. And thanks, largely, to a woman who would never be publicly acknowledged. That evening, Poirot sat in his apartment once more, sipping tisane and polishing his silver moustache comb. Hastings sat across from him, reading the latest headlines. "Still think it's too neat an ending?" Hastings asked, half teasing. Poirot raised a brow. "No, mon ami, it is not neat. It is human." He stood, walking to the window. "The mystery began with a vanished man," he said. "But in truth it was about masks, those we wear and those we see through. Garnett, Delmar, Clara, Marek, all played roles in a theatre of deception. But beneath it all was something very simple. Fear of betrayal, and the courage to prevent it. He looked out over the city. It is always the same, Hastings. The little grey cells do not merely solve crimes. They observe the soul beneath the surface. Still, Hastings muttered, folding his newspaper, I wouldn't mind a mystery involving less international intrigue and more afternoon tea. Poirot chuckled. Careful what you wish for. The teacup, too, may conceal poison. The next morning, Poirot rose early. Hastings found him already dressed, standing at the window, his posture still and precise, as though the night's sleep had only further refined his lines rather than relaxed them. The matter is not yet complete, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice low and thoughtful. Hastings, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, gave him a puzzled look. I thought we had it all. Marek, the real list, the truth behind Garnett's disappearance. Poirot turned slightly, raising a finger. You forget, mon ami. The one thing that I never do, motive must be absolute. Marek's story explains the theft, yes, but not Garnett himself. His disappearance, his message about a second party aboard the train, the man in the corridor. There is still a shadow on the edges of this picture, and I do not like shadows where there should be light. Hastings frowned. But if Marek's goal was only to protect the agents from being sold out, then why disappear Garnett entirely? Poirot finished for him. It was unnecessary. She could have used him to help expose the internal rot. He was, after all, a loyal officer. But instead, he was removed. Why? The silence that followed was short-lived, interrupted by a knock at the door. A bellboy stood with a telegram. Poirot took it with a murmur of thanks and opened it with delicate fingers. As he read, his brows lifted subtly. Well? Hastings asked. Poirot handed it over. The telegram bore the signature of Chief Inspector Japp. Delmare in custody. Attempted to cross border with forged papers. Claims he has information on a third party. Wants to speak to you only. Hastings sat up straighter. You think he's bluffing? I think, said Poirot, he may be playing his final card, and he would not do so unless he believed himself cornered. By midday, they were once again within the sterile confines of the Swiss authorities' holding office. Delmare sat behind a table in a beige interrogation room, his suit crumpled, his face drawn and sleepless. He smirked as they entered. Back again, Poirot? I hoped you would be. Poirot remained standing, his gaze sharp. I will hear your story, monsieur, if it is worth hearing. If not, we shall part ways here, and I shall forget your name entirely. Delmare's smile faltered. He glanced at Hastings, then leaned forward. You're chasing the wrong end of the fox, Poirot. Marek wasn't the only one playing a double game. Garnett, he was on to something much bigger, and he tried to warn you. I'm aware of his message, Poirot said evenly. A second party aboard the train. Delmare nodded. Yes. You assumed that meant Marek or me. But Garnett wasn't talking about us. He was talking about someone else. Someone invisible. Poirot folded his arms. Proceed. Delmare hesitated, then continued. There's a figure operating inside British intelligence. They call him Kingfisher. No one knows his real name. But Marek was hunting him. That's why she took the list. She believed Kingfisher had already begun turning agents. Garnett found her, confronted her. She explained, but he didn't trust her entirely. He knew the leak went deeper. And what became of him? Delmare shrugged. He arranged to disappear, said it was the only way to follow the trail without being silenced. He had a contact in Geneva. Someone at the embassy. Said they'd help him fake his exit and get closer to Kingfisher, but I haven't heard from him since. For all I know, he's dead. Poirot studied Delmare, then asked, Who was the contact? Delmare smirked again. No name. Just a code. Cicero. Poirot was silent for a long moment. Then, with a crisp nod, he turned on his heel. Merci, Monsieur Delmare. That will be all." Outside, Hastings followed at a trot. "Do you believe him?" "I believe, mon ami," Poirot said slowly, "that we must confirm one final detail." They returned to the British Embassy just as the sun was sinking low across the Geneva rooftops. Poirot asked to see the attaché in charge of intelligence liaisons. A pale, clean-shaven man named Edwin Marsh greeted them in a private office, his voice clipped and dry. "Monsieur Poirot," he said with a nod. "Back again so soon?" "Indeed, monsieur. I wish to inquire about a man known only as Cicero. He is allegedly affiliated with this embassy." Marsh didn't blink. "I've never heard of him." Poirot's gaze lingered on the man. "How strange. Garnett reportedly made contact with him just days ago. You are certain?" "Quite. If he exists, he's not on our rosters." Poirot stepped closer, the light glinting off his immaculate shoes. "But that is the beauty of someone like Cicero, is it not? One does not find his name on any list. One finds it in the dust left behind by others." Marsh's jaw tightened. "You're making dangerous insinuations." "And yet," said Poirot softly, "it is you who has spoken the name before I explained it." There was a flicker, barely perceptible. But Poirot saw it. Hastings saw it too. Poirot continued, voice silk-wrapped steel. "You denied knowledge too quickly. That is not the diplomat's way. It is the spy's way. You cleaned up Garnett's disappearance. Perhaps you even arranged it. You knew Marek had the list, and you planned to take it not to protect agents, but to control them." Marsh took a step back. "This is absurd." "But not untrue," said Poirot, stepping forward. "Delmar feared exposure. Marek feared betrayal. Garnett feared you. And now, monsieur, so must you fear the truth. Because I have already informed the Swiss and British authorities. Your office will be searched. Your movements reviewed." Marsh's cool exterior cracked. He lunged, not toward Poirot, but toward a drawer in his desk. Hastings sprang forward, grabbing the man by the shoulders and wrestling him down. Within minutes, embassy guards had arrived. Marsh was escorted out, silent, the muscles in his jaw twitching. Poirot watched him go with something like regret. "Le traître élégant," he murmured. "The refined traitor. Always so neat, so loyal in appearance. But even the most perfect knot may unravel if pulled with care." Later that evening, back at their lodgings, Poirot sat once more with his tisane. Hastings lit a cigarette, though he did so with a curious look in his eye. So in the end, Garnett vanished himself on purpose. Marek was a reluctant thief, and Marsh, the gentlemanly attaché, was the true enemy all along. Poirot inclined his head. "The layers, Hastings. They hide one within the other. Each person acted as they believed best, and yet in their silence, they created danger. Do you think we'll hear from Garnett again?" "I believe he's alive, and I believe he will return when he feels it safe. Perhaps under a new name, but I shall know him by the eyes. Always, the eyes tell the truth." Hastings exhaled a long stream of smoke. "A vanished passenger, an invisible traitor, and a stolen list. I think we've earned a rest." Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes, mon ami, until the next mystery steps aboard." The next day dawned with a crisp clearness that belied the turmoil of the previous days. Poirot, always immaculate, took his breakfast slowly, his manner serene as though the events of espionage, betrayal, and vanishing passengers were matters as routine as trimming his mustache. Hastings, on the other hand, barely touched his toast, his mind still brimming with unanswered questions. "Poirot," he said at last, unable to contain himself. "We've caught Marsh, yes, and the embassy will surely find enough to convict him. But what about Garnett? If he's alive, where is he now? And what of Marek? Will she be punished? I can't help but feel that the mystery, while solved, hasn't quite settled." Poirot set down his cup with a faint clink. "You are astute to feel that way, Hastings. The solution, yes, has emerged, but resolution is another matter. And before we can tie the final ribbon on this affair, we must do what I always do when a crime seems closed. Re-examine each piece from the beginning. Hastings sighed. Haven't we done that already? No, said Poirot firmly. We examined the how, now we examine the why, in full clarity. The train, the compartment, the empty seat, Garnett's bag still under the bunk, the presence of a list so dangerous it could topple networks across Europe. Marek, the conflicted courier, Delmare, the fleeing ex-operative, Marsh, the hidden kingfisher. All these pieces formed the puzzle, but there remained one question Poirot had yet to answer aloud. Why did Garnett trust no one enough to speak plainly? Poirot rose, smoothing the front of his jacket. We must go to the source, he said. There is one final thread, one final visit to make. Come, Hastings. The two men returned once more to the embassy, though this time not to speak with Marsh, now under heavy investigation, but with the ambassador himself, a reserved man of diplomatic poise named Sir Benedict Ellsworth. He received them in his private office, the windows overlooking a tidy square where nothing seemed amiss. I must thank you, Monsieur Poirot, he said, after pleasantries were exchanged. Though the notion that a traitor operated so close to our core is chilling. Poirot bowed slightly. It is my duty, monsieur, but I come not for gratitude, I come for clarity. Garnett's disappearance. Do you know where he is? Sir Benedict's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Officially, I do not. Poirot stepped forward, his gaze intent. But unofficially, perhaps you do. There was a pause. The diplomat leaned back, fingers steepled. I must ask you, Monsieur Poirot, do you intend to make this matter public? If necessary, yes. But I prefer discretion. As, I believe, would Garnett. Sir Benedict exhaled slowly. He is in Zurich, under deep protection. We orchestrated his disappearance to flush out the leak. We suspected Marsh for months but lacked evidence. When Garnett intercepted Marek, he realized she was a pawn, not the player. So he proposed a strategy. He would vanish, letting suspicion fall upon him. Meanwhile, Marsh would grow confident and act. Poirot nodded slowly. A sacrifice of reputation to catch the true serpent. Yes, and it worked, but it came at a cost. Hastings frowned. What cost? Sir Benedict looked grim. Garnett cannot return, not openly. He will be reassigned, given a new identity. Officially, he is presumed dead, even to his family. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment. Such are the quiet casualties of war, even in times of peace. There was silence. Then Poirot asked, And Marek? She will be exonerated in secret, perhaps reassigned as well. It would not do to prosecute someone who saved lives by acting on conscience. But we cannot acknowledge her publicly either. The theatre must remain intact. As they left the embassy, Hastings seemed troubled. There's something deeply unjust about it all, Poirot. Garnett saved lives, and yet he vanishes like a criminal. Marek is cleared, yet must disappear. Marsh, the real traitor, will be prosecuted, yes, but the public will never know the depth of his crimes. Poirot nodded slowly. Ah, mon ami, you touch upon something most profound. Justice is not always a matter of scales balanced in plain view. Sometimes it is done in the shadows, quietly, so that the greater structure may remain standing. But I agree, it is not satisfying. Not to the soul. They walked in silence for some time before Hastings, looking to lighten the mood, said, Still, you must admit your little grey cells were in fine form this time, Poirot. A vanishing man, a false suspect, a buried traitor. You saw through it all. Poirot gave a small smile. Merci, Hastings, but I merely listened. To the contradictions, the silences, the things left unsaid. It is there, in the omissions, that truth so often hides. They returned to their hotel, where a small envelope awaited Poirot at the front desk. No sender was listed. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper with one neatly typed line. Merci. G. Poirot tucked the note into his inner pocket with quiet satisfaction. That evening, they dined in a small bistro near the river. Poirot was unusually pensive. Hastings, after a glass of wine, dared to ask, "Are you satisfied with how it ended?" Poirot tapped the stem of his glass thoughtfully. "I'm satisfied, yes. But content? No. For it reminds me that even the best intentions, like Garnet's, may lead one to isolation, and that even the most precise logic must at times accept the blur of moral ambiguity." He smiled then, softly, and looked out the window at the darkened river. "But at least," he added, "the innocent are safe, the guilty exposed, and my mustaches remain unruffled." Hastings laughed. "That's the spirit." Poirot inclined his head. "À votre santé, mon ami." They toasted quietly as Geneva shimmered in the night, the shadows at last giving way to light, if only for those with the eyes to see.